So the budget IEM market is getting a bit out of hand, to the point where you can spend like 20 bucks and still get something that sounds pretty damn good. The comparison point being, of course, if you were going to spend 20 bucks on a pair of full-sized over-the-ear headphones, I mean, the IEMs are just going to decimate them in every single aspect. Now, of course, once you start getting into the hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars even, that's when full-size headphones can outshine what a small driver IEM can do. But the budget stuff is really exciting. Now, I'm going to be talking about these IEMs from a bit of a gaming angle, because although I do enjoy music, I mean, who doesn't? I'm just not the type of person to critically listen to the notes and the nuances and instruments and stuff like that. If that's your thing though, then definitely go and check out Josh Velour. That guy truly has you covered if that's what you're into. So then, what makes a good gaming IEM? Well, apart from them needing to be, comfortable for long periods of time, which thankfully all of the ones that we're checking out today are, we're really after that full and natural sounding game audio. Nothing that sounds harsh or overemphasized, and also where directional cues are nice and easy to pick up on. My preferences do lean towards a bit more bass emphasis, particularly IEMs that can represent sub-bass quite nicely. That will be a big win for me. That does blend into my music preferences as well. Hip-hop, rap, electronic, stuff like that does really sound a lot more fun on bassier products. But again, for a gaming IEM, specifically for first-person shooters, we're after clear footsteps, gun sounds that don't sound too harsh, and a game world that feels airy and open. So one of the things that I did to evaluate which of these IEMs were best when it came to gaming was select a handful of clips from a few different first-person shooters and use these as references, essentially like a benchmark. I'd play through one clip on one IEM and listen to it pretty intensely, and then switch over to a different IEM and see what the differences are between them. And by doing this, you can truly make comparisons on what you hear better on one versus the other. That's compared to just, playing games and hoping to hear some differences between them, which of course you can hear the obvious differences between them, but game audio being quite random, you don't really pick up on those fine details. Now, a few of these clips I purposely selected due to having a lot of footstep audio, as that's one of the main things that I wanted to test out here, and I actually found that some of the IEMs that supposedly isolated these frequencies just by being more treble focused, some of them sounded worse when it came to actually positioning those footsteps. And kind of what I found was that without any bass, there was just no context on what I was hearing, as if those lower frequencies were creating some kind of bass and staging for the footsteps themselves. And I think a big factor in this is that not all footstep audio is just treble. I think that's a massive generalization that a lot of people keep repeating. I went through a range of different games and scenarios and played back the parts where pretty much only footsteps were the sounds at play, and as you can see, there is plenty of mid and low frequencies bunched in there too. So just something to keep in mind if you're looking for a good IEM for gaming, and maybe more so competitive gaming. It's not just all about treble, although that's kind of what you see repeated over and over again online. Of course, you don't want something that's like drowning in bass either, but at least having a bit of bass can provide quite a bit of value in staging and context of what you're actually hearing. But now let's get into what IEMs I actually had a chance to test out, and let's start at the real budget end of things and work our way up to about the $50 mark. So let's start with these. These recently released, these are the Moondrop Quarks, and these are only 13 bucks. And as I said in the intro, if you spend 13 bucks on a pair of full-sized over-the-ear headphones, I mean, will they even play sound? Will they even work for more than a couple of days? These, on the other hand, are incredible for that kind of money. And I think the best way to describe the audio from these is they're just kind of comfortable. It's pretty straightforward, nothing's over bassy, nothing's over technical, and they're not going to really wow you in any aspect other than the value. It's only when you compare them back to back to some of the other options that we're looking at today and you go, okay, that's what's missing in terms of the audio experience, but listening to them in isolation, you do get used to them and they're actually pretty good. Now, not only is the audio comfortable, but the IEMs themselves I actually found to be really comfortable physically. The stem is super small, super lightweight, and they just plug into your ears like a normal earbud. Now, stepping things up a notch, we have the $22 Moondrop Chus. So same company as the previous IEM, and of course, spending more money with the same brand, you're going to get yourself a better product. That's represented here with a more noticeable bass response and more detail in those mid and high frequencies. In general, I just found the Quarks to be a bit flatter and more recessed than the Chus when it came to gaming. Again, fine in isolation, but the Chus allow you to hear things just at a different level and speed for a bit more money. Now, just plainly speaking here, if you're someone who doesn't want a bassy audio experience, you hear bass in the game and that kind of just irritates you and you just want to kind of reveal as much detail as possible, then either of the Moondrop products are a good choice. And I think the Chus are worth the extra $9 or so over the Quarks. They just have a little bit more kind of staging and depth to them compared to the Quarks, which in my experience feel just a little bit flatter when it comes to game audio. Now, if I can just iterate just a little bit, because I know there are some people out there who don't want any bass, but I mean, we'll get to an option here which just has a little bit more bass than these options, and it does provide so much more depth and clarity and just a more natural sounding game audio. So I hate to repeat myself, but yeah, these do feel pretty stripped down when it comes to gaming. Now, these next three options are where we get into some really interesting tuning, and these ones in particular, there's quite a bit to talk about. These are the $39 Blon BL03, and the entire low end on these is just absolutely phenomenal. So I used quite a bit of Battlefield 1 clips for reference here. That game just has a beautiful audio implementation, and it's perfect for demonstrating the different sound stages and how present each IEM feels. And these are honestly right up there with my IE300s in terms of immersion and physically placing you in that particular game. I mean, there were a few games there where there were just a bunch of grenades and explosions, people screaming. It's just absolute mayhem. It's crazy how this budget IEM can make that game feel. Due to how strong the bass is, you can literally feel the walls shaking, the pressure in the air, and at the same time there's still quite a lot of detail, like the rattling and separation of gunshots, the tiny rocks flying past you. It's pretty crazy. Now, all of that bass focus, although it is kind of my preferred way to play a game like Battlefield, and the immersion is just next level with these IEMs and all of that sub bass, it just really places you in that game so well. It's not an IEM that I can overly recommend for a game like Apex, and I honestly don't really know what to say about these when I was playing Valorant, but yeah, I just felt completely lost, which is not something that I've had from an IEM before. But yeah, placing footsteps was like really difficult. Sound cues were just way off. I couldn't tell if someone was behind me or whatnot. With these IEMs, I'm not even exaggerating, I don't know where the footsteps were coming from. What I would recommend instead for those games are these right here. So these are the Tin T2s, which come in at about $50 at the time of filming, and the sound signature here leans a lot more towards neutral and clean, but not so much as the Moondrop Chus, for example, where they begin to feel pretty stripped down when it comes to gaming. So comparing these to the previous IEMs that we've looked at, I think they have better imaging and soundstage than the Chus, and are just a bit of a cleaner sound signature for gaming. Not as fun as something like the Blon BL03s for something like Battlefield, but for games like Apex and Valorant, they deliver a really natural sounding experience. There's enough bass here to add to the experience and provide context of what you're hearing, but that's pretty much it. The rest of the focus is on delivering those upper mids and the treble. Unfortunately though, these are probably the least comfortable IEM out of the bunch here. Still something that you can get used to and find comfortable over time, but the stem here is just a little bit too long for my preference, and they really require a deep insert to feel fully seated. Now, some of you might remember the ZS10 Pros that I reviewed a while back. This was my first introduction into the realm of really good budget IEMs. These are the most similar here in my opinion to the Blon BL03s, but I don't get that lost feeling in games like Valorant or Apex that I mentioned. Here the audio cues felt clear and concise, just as with the Tin T2s, but just with noticeably more bass added when those gunshots do hit. Overall, I'd still consider these a really good option. Now, I quickly want to mention the static and white noise, which is a bit of an issue with a couple of these IEMs when you just don't have anything playing. Essentially, we're talking about the noise floor, and it mostly depends on what you have them plugged into. So I tested a few different audio interfaces, and here's what I found. The 3.5mm jack on my motherboard was absolutely fine for all of them, but this will depend on how good your board is, and the Audient Evo 4, which I use as my primary interface, was fine for all of the IEMs except for the ZS10 Pros. There I can hear some very slight system chatter noise when you don't have audio playing through them. It is a little bit noticeable if you don't have anything playing at all and you're listening out for it. There's also a tiny bit here on the BL03s. It's not to the level that it would drive me crazy, but I mean, if you're just sitting there with absolutely no music or anything playing, you'll probably notice it. I then tried the Blue Yeti Nano, where all of the IEMs, even my IE300s, have a really static noise floor. Pretty unfortunate, and not a microphone I can recommend with IEMs at this point. I then tried the Sennheiser GSX300, it's a small little $50 interface, and similar result to the Evo 4, really only affecting the ZS10 Pros and the O3s, but the static at this point was more noticeable if you're just sitting there with nothing playing. I also tried the Wave XLR and the new low impedance mode, which was made specifically for IEMs. It does help things out a bit, but not to the point where I can comfortably recommend it for any of these IEMs on the table. Static is still there, just less noticeable with that low impedance mode. So take that for what you will. The Evo 4 is what I personally use and doesn't seem to be much of a problem with these IEMs. Maybe a little bit for the ZS10 Pros, but you really have to be listening out for it. You can hear a little bit of system noise. So as for recommendations, I would personally recommend the ZS10 Pros and the Tin T2s as kind of the two main options if you're looking for a good gaming IEM, and specifically for competitive gaming where you want something that sounds natural with a lot of focus on directional cues. Probably the ZS10 Pros if you want a little bit more bass, but maybe the Tin T2s if you want a bit more of a competitive focus. I would have loved to recommend the Blon 03s, I think for really bass and immersion heavy games. They're still probably a really good option, but you're just going to feel completely lost when it comes to games like CSGO, Valorant, and Apex. I don't know what it was with those IEMs. One game they're perfect, and the other ones you just feel completely lost, so not something I can recommend for those. And then when it comes to the Moondrops, you really have to have an appreciation for that stripped down, clean, neutral sound signature to get any enjoyment out of them for gaming, because you're not really left with much else. Like I said, the slightly extra bass on those Tin T2s does really help quite a bit in providing that extra staging and context of what you're actually hearing. So that's the roundup so far. Hopefully you enjoyed and got some value out of it. If you're interested in picking any of these up, I will have the links listed down below. We'll probably do another one of these in a few months when more of them will undoubtedly release and the pricing even gets more competitive than what it is. But yeah, you can really pick any of these options and be pretty happy with them. As always, a huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.